I am, without a doubt, a massive Sonic the Hedgehog fan. When I first started playing games, I wasn't playing newer games at the time. I had a small CRT TV and a few consoles. The first time that I had an opportunity to play a game, it was one on the Sega Genesis. The console happened to be hooked up to the old TV, and I remember my sister showing me how to use it, and the cartridge that we had in the system was the original Sonic the Hedgehog. I played the original Sonic the Hedgehog like crazy. However, I never really made it past Marble Zone because it was just super difficult for me when I was young. But despite that, I always loved the Blue Hedgehog. Years later, I played and completed the Sonic Adventure games, and those games were some of the best games that I've played to this day. Despite all of these games, there's one that stuck out to me, maybe not the most, but for a special reason. You see, I often got information about games that were unfamiliar to me at my friend's house, and in 2010, I went over to my friend's house like how I usually would. Their living room had a Gamecube hooked up to it. We would usually play games like Super Smash Bros. Melee or Mario Party on it, but this time, they had a different game in it. They had Sonic Riders. Now, I've played plenty of kart racers in my time. Even at that point in my life, I had played a lot of them, but Sonic Riders was different. You see, I could play as Sonic in a cool racing game where they use hoverboards? Isn't that cool? We played multiplayer on the game, playing through a handful of the tracks, and eventually we went to go and do something else. But just like the rest of the games that really stood out when I went over to the house, I just had to have them for myself. My parents ended up finding a copy of Sonic Riders pre-owned at GameStop a little after I had asked for it for a birthday gift, and they ended up giving it to me early near the end of the fall season. I was super excited to get to play this game some more and really get into it. I remember first entering my bedroom with the game on the GameCube, and I tore off all the plastic wrapping, threw it to the side, grabbed the small disc inside, and put it into the GameCube. I turned on the game, and I was greeted by an opening movie. This opening featured awesome artwork, the usual amazing and outstanding Sonic music that was apparent in every game. It showcased all of the characters in the game racing on these hoverboards and performing stunts in a massive city. Now, when you're young, the coolness factor of this stuff, I don't know how to describe it, but it's multiplied tenfold. The opening movie ends and I begin the game, going into the story mode right away, picking the only available option, the Hero's Story. Now, there were a bunch of other options like normal races and some additional game modes. I had already played a good handful of normal races at my friend's house at this point, but I never got to play the story. I knew that Sonic games had a great story and characters, so I was super looking forward to getting to play through the story. Especially since not a lot of kart racers similar to this really had a story mode that had anything more than just something super basic. The Hero's Story opens up with another fantastic cutscene featuring the beautiful Sonic 2000 CGI. Why was Sonic CGI in the mid to late 2000s just so good? Like, look at Sonic Riders, Sonic and the Black Knight, Sonic and the Secret Rings. Sonic peaked during this era for me, and parts of that were thanks to how awesome these pre-rendered cutscenes looked. The Hero's Story opening cutscene features the main cast walking through a futuristic city looking for the Chaos Emeralds. Suddenly, 3 unfamiliar characters crash out of a building racing away on hoverboards. Sonic chases them on foot and gets into an altercation with them, where he decides to get on a hoverboard for himself because he couldn't catch them. Now, I'm a firm believer that Sonic can catch them, but just decided to race them fairly. I am not coping. This cutscene was so awesome. This game has a theater option where I would rewatch this cutscene so often. Same with a few other cutscenes that are in this game just because of how cool they were. There was another cutscene that followed this where Eggman announces the Grand Prix to win some Chaos Emeralds where you have to beat all of the other racers using a hoverboard. Eggman also introduced some of the new characters that came to Sonic Riders a little bit. The main cast of Sonic Riders is pretty much Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Dr. Eggman, and 3 new characters: Jet the Hawk, Wave the Swallow, and Storm the Albatross. I always thought that Jet was such an awesome character and rival for Sonic, and it's really a shame that we never really got to see him outside of the Sonic Riders series. With that said though, he does appear in Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games sometimes, same with a few random Sonic games, but never as a main character. After this cutscene ended, the first gameplay segment started. I wasn't that great when I played at my friend's house, but I had fun. I was determined to get good at this game so that I could beat them when I wanted to play against them. Looking back on it, I was pretty competitive about this stuff when I was young, but when all you do is play games, it's natural to not want to be a loser and come in last place all the time. So thus began my training arc where I would play the game and become the best that I could. Looking back on it, I learned how things work surprisingly quickly. This game functions pretty differently than a lot of other similar kart racer games. It wasn't really similar to Mario Kart, which I had played a ton at the time. The race starts with you having to run and jump on the board to a countdown. You jump on the board when you cross the finish line, but if you cross too early, you get penalized. So you have to run and jump onto it as soon as the timer hits 0, and the faster you run to it, the quicker you start off. So there was this perfect ratio that you had to get to start the race perfectly, and after a few races, I ended up figuring it out. That said, it did take a little bit of experimenting, but we got there. After the race starts, you ride a hoverboard and you race the other racers. On your right, you have a gas meter. As time goes on, your gas depletes, but you also have a special boost that you can use to give you additional speed and can damage other racers. Now, these mechanics can go on and get pretty in-depth, but for simplicity's sake, that's the gist of it. It's not that similar to Mario Kart, but I loved how this game played. It just felt like how I would imagine a Sonic kart racer would feel to play. Fast and tight gameplay with tons of mechanics. Now, with all that said, that's a lot of mechanics to keep in mind. I knew at least the bare minimum of basics thanks to my friends teaching me at their house. But that was pretty much it. All I knew was the basic controls and how to start the race right. It took me a handful of races to really understand just the basics of all of this, but once I figured it out, I was a monster. I began making big progress in the story because I wasn't losing anymore, and eventually I made it near the end of the hero's story. The races and objectives weren't particularly challenging, and the story wasn't anything super special, but it was interesting enough to keep me paying attention. Most of the story is just the competitors bumping heads with each other and just some goofy gags. At least, that's what it looks like at the surface. Near the end of the hero story, you run into yet another gorgeous pre-rendered CGI scene, and this is probably one of my favorite in the game. Just to look at how beautiful it is. Now, it turns out there's some huge mystical ruins from prehistoric times that use super advanced ancient technology, and Eggman wanted to get a hold of it. So, Eggman ends up using Jet to summon it, and Eggman abuses that to go and try to get some treasure. The game wasn't particularly challenging. Then I got to Babylon Garden. Now, this is the place where everything just fell apart. This track is hard. A lot of sections don't have walls, and you have to finish in first place. It was easy to fall off and hard to catch back up, which meant that if I made a single mistake, odds are I wouldn't win. Due to the track's narrow and tight design, it meant that you had to use every mechanic that the game teaches you, and you have to do it well. I played this section for like an hour, and I was getting so upset because up until this point, I thought I was doing well. Turns out, this game runs surprisingly deep. I stopped doing the main story for a while and went back to normal races, where I would replay all of the unlocked tracks, and I would just spend the next day or two just doing that. It was a ton of fun, and I felt like it really developed my ability to play the game, because the next time I went back to the hero story, I finished first place on Babylon Garden on my 4th race back. Now, I was absolutely popping off. It was a sign that I was improving. It felt good. I liked that. Sorry, I don't really know why I did that. This was the final stage of the hero story, and when I finished it, I unlocked the stage to play normally, and I also unlocked the Babylon story. I thought that was it for the story, but it turns out there's a ton more to do. So, I started the Babylon story, where the main focus is on the opposite team who we've been rivaling this whole time. I was super excited because that meant that this game had even more content to go through, so I started right away. Now, I've been playing the same 6 tracks for a little while now, and when I was at my friend's house, I didn't see that they had any more, so when the game showed me a new track that I hadn't seen before, I was super thrilled. There were different versions of tracks they already played through, and I loved them. Something particularly interesting about the Babylon story is that you get a much deeper storyline than what you received in the hero story, where they get into the ancient civilizations, artifacts, and all this other stuff. Similarly, they showcase more of Eggman's manipulation and plans throughout the story. I always thought that it was kind of cool that the story was getting more depth to it, but unfortunately, I still think it sits in a weird limbo where it doesn't quite know how deep that it wants to go. I continued through the game, following pretty much the same story on tracks that were a little bit more difficult, but still manageable, up until we got to Babylon Garden. Once again, my greatest enemy. You see, Babylon Garden got harder. Now you have more CPUs to race against, and it's an even harder track. You still gotta get first, and I remember I struggled so much on this track, I spent maybe a solid 3 hours straight playing this game on the same track trying to win, and eventually I did. That said, the journey to winning was quite painful. I would get so close to winning so many times that it was teasing me and just staring me right in the face. It happened again, and again, over and over, and I was just so tired of it. Gradually though, I did improve at the track until I was getting closer and closer to winning. I'm unsure if I was improving at the track, or if I was just improving at the game. Maybe a little bit of both? When I finally completed this track, I felt like a tournament winner or something. Like, I don't know how to describe the energy that I had, but it was enough energy for me to run a mile or two right then, immediately. I was absolutely stoked. I expected the story to end right there, just like how it did with the hero story, but it kept going? There was a real ending for this, where you have a pseudo boss fight with a genie in the form of a race, and it was so cool. No racing game I've ever played has had a boss fight in the form of a race like this, so it was something just really cool to experience. It wasn't particularly challenging, but it was fun to play, and the stage that you raced on was super cool as well. I can't stress just how much simple fun that this entire story was. It was just a blast to play through. Now, the story in general, it's not like it's anything too special, but it was still super fun to play through. And for that, does it need to be anything more? Well, maybe. You see, Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, the sequel to Sonic Riders, they do that. So once every year or two, I return to this game to replay through the story real quick, because it's fun and I can. I remember when I originally completed the story, and I ended up unlocking a handful of characters like Shadow, and was absolutely blown away because he's such a cool character and I didn't really expect to see him in the game. Completing the story unlocks a Grand Prix mode where you can replay through the Hero or Babylon story tracks, and if you get first on each of those races in Grand Prix, you unlock even more tracks. These were tracks that even my friends never ended up getting, and I remember even they were shocked when they came to my house and saw these new tracks. It was the Sega Carnival and Illusion tracks, which were based off of various Sega IP at the time. These were my favorite stages undeniably in this game, just due to the material references and just how cool everything came together and looked. To this day, I still think that these stages are super cool additions to the game, and I think I appreciate them even more now than what I did when I was younger, just because I know a lot more about each one of these references. So it really made this universe that Sega has made come to life and come together in a racetrack that just felt super fun and cool to play on. Somehow, they even gave these tracks that same old feel of you playing on an old arcade cabinet, and I don't know how they managed to do that. Maybe it was the track design, maybe it was the gimmicks that was in these tracks. It's really hard to tell, but all I know is that I love it. Now, completing the story also unlocked mission mode stuff, but when I was younger, I didn't really play it all that much. I instead finished it years later and unlocked all of the special gear related to it. I didn't do that when I was younger because my brain couldn't and didn't really care for other stuff outside of just racing. That said, there was one thing that I still did throughout my time playing this game after the story. It was buying the rest of the Extreme Gear hoverboards. So you collected rings throughout races to level up, but the amount of rings that you had at the end of the race gets saved into a wallet, which you can then spend at a shop to earn new gear. Some gear had gimmicks like super improved drifting, continuous boosting, and tons of other just really fun stuff. Like really, you can make your own playstyle out of these gears based on what they were able to do, and I love that amount of customizability in a racing game at that time. Like it wasn't the old boring, just change the stats of the gear and there you go. It was a proper, like, it would control differently. I continued to play until I unlocked everything outside of mission mode, then I kept playing just because I had fun with the game. Throughout my time playing it, I randomly decided to check out the additional game modes that the game had, which were tag and survival game modes. These game modes were pretty interesting additions to the game, but one day, my friends and I decided to play the survival game mode. Out of these odd and end game modes, this was the one that we spent the most of our time playing. Don't get me wrong, this was still nothing compared to the normal races, but we had a good bit of fun with this game mode. There's two survival game mode types, survival race and survival battle mode. We tried survival race, we didn't really understand it, but the survival battle mode, this is the one to play. Survival battle mode is basically like Mario Balloon Battle, but Sonic Riders. What's super interesting is that this mode has proper items like shields or things to damage people that you just don't see in the normal races. You still go after people using the special boosting to attack other people, and your goal is to stay alive the longest while taking the other people out. My friends and I had a blast playing this game mode together. We ended up collectively deciding that the dual tower stage was the best for this game mode, and we just sat there and played this game mode together repeatedly on the same map for a little while. We did this until the afternoon turned to dusk, where we went back to our homes. We never did play this game mode again, but I think it was simple fun that was super appreciated compared to the usual high technical requirements that the game had. Or maybe it was because I was beating them so hard at the races that they wanted to do something else. Okay, maybe I was that guy. Now that I think about it, I really might have been that guy. Whoops. I continued to play the game over time. Eventually though, I did get a little bit tired of it. I ended up forgetting that there was a whole mission mode that I still had to do, but I did end up doing this much later on, just not during this time. It was definitely a fun time to be had, and if you haven't played this game before, I really do urge you to just play through the story and have some fun with it. I think to this day that this game has aged so well, and I had tons of awesome memories with Sonic Riders. But Sonic Riders is only the first game in this series, and growing up, I played all 3 of them. Sometime in 2011, I went to GameStop with my parents and saw a game in the Wii section. It was Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. I pointed out to my parents and I just had to have this game. They allowed me to buy it in exchange for a few weeks of allowance in advance, and I went home a winner. Now listen, most people go home from GameStop a winner, but I cannot stress this enough, I went home a winner. Why'd I say it like that? I went home a winner. I had a comparable time playing Sonic Riders Zero Gravity as I did Sonic Riders, and this game is awesome. I'll always remember the time I played Sonic Riders originally when I was young, and it was kind of one of the last few games that I really got to play with my friends before we split up, so it's quite a special game to me. The deep mechanics of Sonic Riders pair well with the fun and simple controls. The visuals and game design still holds up super well to this day. The concepts were super unique, and together, these made playing the game an awesome experience. This game wasn't perfect, but it felt like the perfect embodiment of what a Sonic kart racing game should be. I still think that out of all of the Sonic racing games that have been released, this one takes the cake. However unlikely it may be, hopefully one day we can get another Sonic game like this. I'm super glad that there's still a massive following for this game that actively plays Sonic Riders and do tournaments and other stuff for it. It's just really nice to see that this game has a massive community despite having it been released all the way back in 2006. Thank you for watching my tribute to Sonic Riders. Please keep an eye out on the channel and expect another tribute video to drop soon where I talk about Sonic Riders Zero Gravity and a little bit about Sonic Free Riders. That video will also have more tidbits and stories about my experience with the original Sonic Riders as well. So this is kind of like a 2-part series, so please look forward to the next part, which should be released within the next few weeks or so. Be sure to subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. Share it if you know someone who might like content like this as well. Be sure to check out my other content. I've made tribute videos on a handful of other games before, so you might be interested in those. I would also love to hear some of your own personal experiences with Sonic Riders if you've ever played it, so be sure to drop a comment down below talking about it.